This working? And is music okay compared to mic and all that? Awesome. Yeah, I should have some medieval music going on in the background. Non-copyright, of course. Uh, oh, okay. I wonder why Gazzy's not here in the music. How's that? Oh, okay. It must have just been really low. Yeah, I didn't want it to overpower the microphone, so it's just kind of background for noise in the background. As long as you guys can hear me clearly, like the music's just sort of to fill any dead space. Well, hopefully. Excellent. All right. I can hear it loud in my headphones, but we'll see how it goes. Hopefully people show up. That would be awesome. It's either that or we're just gonna hang out and chat about 3D printing. Okay. When I get moving here, I will start. I'll have to turn the music down because I can hear the music in my headphones. I wonder if there's a way for me to pull it out of my headphones and only into the stream. We're figuring it out. Either way, I'm going to turn it down here. Awesome. Okay, yeah, I added some filters to the mic for some noise canceling and stuff like that, so I hope it sounds super good. What's up, you guys? Welcome to the first Twitch stream of the class. My name is Ty. I own TableFlip Foundry, and I wanted to start a kind of a classroom setting to help us. I'm actually going to mute that. I actually started this sort of classroom setting to help people who are new with 3D printing figure out how to tune their printers or learn how to do their pre-supports. And I think there's a lot of random information floating around the internet, and it's really hard for a brand new person to probably locate the information they need in order to hey, there's a light, in order to discover what they need to discover about 3D printing. And I think as a new user, it can be really daunting. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I want to get a printer. I don't know where to start. I don't know what printer to get. I don't know settings. I don't know this, that, and the other things. So I went through the whole process myself being brand new with 3D printing, where it was, okay, so I jump in these Facebook groups, I browse YouTube, I pick up some info here, I pick up some info there, and I thought it would be really good for us to maybe have some sort of like classroom setting where we could, maybe answer some questions that are specific. If you had a question about, why are you having lamination issues in your print, and you try to type that into YouTube or to Google, or you post on Facebook, you get 10 different answers, or you scour through 3 hours worth of footage to try to find the answer to your question, and that could be pretty hard. So this class is really meant for people who are brand new to 3D printing. Maybe they're just doing their first couple of prints or just learning how to tune their printers if they haven't tried that before. So we're going to talk a little bit about, where do we where do we where do we start? How do we get it right? What do we do? So I'm going to try a few things here. This is my first stream, so I'm going to sort of muddle my way through actually figuring out how to properly control everything in the stream. But I figured we would start again like last week or the last class. Let's start with talking about tuning a little bit, and we can sort of come up with some simplified ways that we can tune our printer really easily. So the first thing we're going to look at is, let's have a look here. This is a little cheat sheet I made. This is the Amerilabs Town calibration test part. So if you just look up Google, Amerilabs calibration test, you're going to find a test pretty identical to this. And this is what I've found to be the most quick and efficient way with a couple of small points that you're looking at that it sort of streamlines the whole process of figuring out whether or not your printer is like nailed down. So I made this little cheat sheet. Take a screenshot, take a picture with your phone, whatever the case is. This is sort of like the go-to for me when I'm doing my test prints. So let's have a quick look at Lychee here, and we're gonna have just a little look around this piece. There's a lot of information we can get just from printing this one little piece, and you can see it only takes about an hour and a half. This is with my Frozen Sonic Mini at 25 microns. So what we want to do is come up with some setting, in my case 2.1 seconds. We want some exposure setting that's going to give us the best results on this test print. So this is sort of like a trial and error process. A lot of people try to use the RERF test, and I see all over the place. How do I read this? What am I looking at? Which one do you guys think is best? I'm not a fan of that process, and I think this has served me very well. It's very simple, and there's like 3 points on this model that I look at that just nail it for me. So we'll take a quick look. This first row here on the left, we want 4 of these stacks of pillars to print, and that 5th stack, it can show up in the print. It definitely won't be standing vertically by the time we're done, especially after cleaning, but we want it to either not, like, just barely not print or just barely print, like right on the edge of printing. So that particular bit right there is a really good indication of your exposure. If you're seeing a really clearly defined set of pillars on this 5th row, you probably overexposed your print a bit, and overexposure is going to cause some problems later. We'll get into what that means exactly and sort of narrow down how do we figure out if it's right. The second indicator that I like to go off of is this pillar. This is the Space Needle. And if you're working with the Space Needle, or you're printing and you're looking at the Space Needle, oftentimes you might notice that the Space Needle severs itself right here, and you don't get this top little bit. So this has a little bit to do with your lift speeds, also combined with underexposure. So what you're looking for is that 5th row to be either just barely printed or just barely not printed. And we also need this Space Needle to be attached. So if you pull it out and all you see is a little pointy tip here with none of this extra area, chances are you either need to up exposure or slow down your lift speed. Now this last one isn't as like pertinent. It's usually a pretty safe bet that this cross in the middle of the circle is going to print. So it's not really like the be all end all. It's a very thick it's a very thick part in comparison to the rest of the model. But it is something I like to look at. Make sure it's clean. Make sure that there's no resin built up inside of it, or that it didn't cure as a blob, and that it's all there. I've had times where the cross is all broken out, and those times are usually under exposure. So we want to, have a quick look at this and kind of get an idea whether or not that cross is actually in there. So those three, pretty much those are the 3 points I hit when I'm looking to tune my printer. So we're going to get in there, we're going to set a setting, and let's say in our case, we're doing the Sonic Mini. I'm going to try it at 1.9, see if it prints. It looks like my Space Needle's not there, so we're going to try it at 2. Yeah, Space Needle might be there, but then I'm not happy with the poles, and then 2.1. And once I kind of get through that process, it uses very little resin and relatively short amount of time. After I'm done with that and I'm happy with those 3, I can kind of poke around and see if I'm seeing these windows, how many of these am I seeing up on the top. But same with this little marker here. Like, this is a pretty hard angle to print. So you can kind of poke around, look at some of these other stats. You can see, I guess they're stats. I don't know the word, but you can kind of see whether or not these indicators for like 0.40 millimeters or 0.2 millimeters are showing up, or if they're buggered. But for the most part, I find that those 3 indicators nail it down for you. Get those 3 to show up, you're pretty much dialed in. You can try to print something that is like reputable. So I print a lot of different Patreon, different artists, pre-support work, and some of them are very reliable. Artisan Guild, the Twin Goddess ones, those are all really reliable supports. And I know that if I print with this, I get good detail. The supports come off easy. I pretty much got it dialed in. But just start with this. Dial your printer in. Don't just send it. Most people just get in there and they grab a file and they go, yep, let's just go. And it's just a big old garbled mess. And that's not what you want. Generally speaking, I say the rule of thumb is you want a print to, you want your exposure to be as absolutely low as you can get away with, right? The more exposure we have, the thicker the parts that we have like in the model, and the thicker those parts is sort of deleting details. So I'm seeing, I'm not used to having to read chat, so I apologize. I'm not ignoring you guys. I'm just figuring this out and trying to like process everything I'm saying. So bear with me, guys. I'm still new at this. So yeah, the checkerboard, as mentioned in chat, like this is a pretty good indicator. If it fills up with resin, you get pooling in there. There's a lot of variables that can affect exposure immensely. One thing that a lot of people never realize until later, or until they catch somebody who happens to know, is temperature. Temperature, and I can't stress this enough, temperature is so important when it comes to exposure settings. So you may go and you may dial this in and get the perfect, like, tuned print, but then tomorrow the temperature, because of summer, raised 10 degrees and you don't have a regulated room, the resin is going to be thinner. The thinner resin will have more light penetration, and you might start noticing you overexposed your print. Even though yesterday you had a perfectly tuned print, you're going to find that with the hotter room, you're going to overexpose. And conversely, it's the other way around. You can get a perfectly tuned print. It's 75 degrees in your room, and then the AC got left on too long, or the temperature dropped suddenly, and now it's 65 degrees in your room, and all of a sudden all your prints are failing. Well, the resin got more viscous, it got thicker, and light doesn't penetrate the resin quite as well. And so you're underexposing, and none of your supports catch. So these are all things to try to keep in mind. You know, if you can keep a perfectly regulated room, you're good. Like I built out a room in my basement. All 6 of my printers go in there. My resin printers. The room has a heater in there that's got a thermostat. It's between 70 and 80 degrees. Let's say 77 is pretty constant, so 75 and 80 degrees at all times. I think humidity has very little to play, but it does play a role. So somewhere between, 25 and 40% humidity, which where we're at is kind of standard. So I don't think I can stress enough. Like temperature is a huge variable. It will make all the difference in the world. Make sure you keep track of your temperature. So tune your print. If the temp goes up, take down a little exposure time. If the temperature goes down, add a little exposure time. And when we say a little, we're talking like 0.1 second, maybe 0.2 seconds. It's not a huge difference, but it's the difference between failure and not failure and a successful print. So hopefully I harped on that enough. So yeah, make sure you go download this. This is the Amerilabs. It's a calibration town or calibration file, whatever they want to call it. And trust me, it is just those 3 points. If you look at the other points, great. But if you can nail down those 3, you are golden for printing. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I think hopefully all you guys totally know what your printer does, how it works. If you're new and any of that got missed, please feel free to speak up in chat. I am more than happy to kind of clarify some of that stuff. I just want to make sure that this is like one of the most important things when it comes to your printer, right? You change resins, you need to recalibrate. You change temperatures, you need to recalibrate. You replace the screen, recalibrate. Like even over time, your UV LEDs can weaken and you need to recalibrate. So this is like a process you should be comfortable with. You should know what you're doing when you see it. You're going to do this not often. I'll go, 3, 4, 5 months at a time, printing 24 hours a day for my store and not have to recalibrate. But I'm very particular about the temp in my room. And I don't have to do it often. When I change the FEP, when I change resin, and if there's any other universal changes, I go through, make sure that I redo it. So great. So let's get into some support work. I want to teach you guys a little trick today, and this might not be a trick it might be a trick you do know. It might be something you don't use, which is totally cool. But if you are brand new and you have never done supports, let's have a quick look. Let's have a quick look at a file and see if we can support it in a way that's totally usable relatively quickly. So let me see if I can find a fun file here to play with. I probably should have had something set up ahead of time. Let's do a file I need to do for work. How about that? Let's do... Okay, we'll keep this somewhat easy to start. So this is it's a leg. It's like a giant spider leg. So this leg is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot going on. The first thing we need to figure out is which orientation is going to work best. It would help if you guys could see my Lychee, wouldn't it? First thing we need to determine is what's going to work best for the file. And there's lots of different ideologies when it comes to kind of figuring out what's the best method, right? Some guys will want to point it straight up. Some guys will want to lay it flat. I'm not sure entirely that there's a right or wrong way to go about that. But me personally, I always look at parts of the file that very particularly need to maintain their shape and size. Okay. Sometimes that doesn't matter at all. Sometimes it's really important. In this case, this leg has got a key that goes into a body. It is really, really important for this part to succeed that this key maintains the perfect shape and size. If this sags or it doesn't get supported properly, then this key won't fit and this whole part is blown and we have to start over. So what I tend to do is sort of sacrifice everything else in favor of this key not needing supports and being given the perfect opportunity to not misshapen. So we need to make sure when we come into to Lychee, which is what we're using. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about Lychee Pro and some features of that today. So if you have Lychee Pro, great. If you don't have Lychee Pro, it's like $5 a month, I think. Buy it. It's worth it. It's total. I mean, $40 for a year. Just go get it. It's fantastic. It will serve you extraordinarily well. Now, in this case, I don't want this very flat point or this very flat parallel, like a mesh against the bed, but I do want this in the air in some fashion. So I'm going to continue to rotate a bit, maybe something like this. So I know I don't need to support my key. My key is very safe. And I feel very comfortable supporting up the edge of this. I might even tilt it a little more. So this is something I would be very happy with to start supporting. Every time we rotate this, we're giving and taking something, right? So if I rotate it something like this, the give is that I now have to, I'm not sure the give or the take. So the benefit of having it like this is that we have far less print time, right? We can crank out a piece way faster. But at the expense of probably having to have more supports to cover like a wider surface area during print. So once we get to about these layers, all of a sudden we have a pretty wide surface area that our supports are gonna have to maintain, and we really want to be sure that that doesn't pop off the build plate. So we're gonna have to toss a bunch of extra supports here. I prefer to put as few supports as possible. And in this particular orientation, we might see a little bit of extra surface area up here at the top. But by the time we get up there, we're going to have quite a few supports like helping it on its way up. And then we know that this top piece never has to be supported. It's going to print just fine. There shouldn't be any shifts. Some people will choose to do the opposite of what I'm doing. They'll put that as the first piece, and that's totally acceptable. It's just really important that you're nailing down. This is my trick to getting the file ready to support here. This is it's just really important that when we're adding the supports here, that we're really closely maintaining the shape of this box, so that we always have the right size and shape and squares. And then we're also going to have to support more of this. But this is acceptable. You know, it's just not the way I'd prefer to do it. I don't want all of these contact points on the shape that has to be the perfect shape. The take from that is that like this place is going to be hidden. We can load it up with a whole bunch of supports and pockmarks, and it doesn't matter how messy it is. Because it's all going to just get hidden inside the model. So it all just comes down to what you think priorities are. I believe that if you nail down your settings, if you nail down your support settings, that you can create support tips that don't damage the model. And so it doesn't matter really where the supports go on the model, because there end up being no damage to it in the long run. So generally speaking, this is how I personally do it. The interesting thing about supports is that there are opinions when it comes to this stuff. And it's not necessarily that anybody's opinion's wrong, right? You can have somebody who's like, you need to put a really fat anchor support on your model. And they put a really fat anchor support on their model. Let's say on the bottom of a foot. Let me grab something with a foot real quick. And they put it on the bottom of a foot, and they say, yeah, it doesn't matter. Throw it on the bottom of the foot. You'll never see the mark. And they're absolutely right. They're not wrong in any way. And so that's an opinion. It's not necessarily the opinion I hold personally, but they're not wrong. You can get to the bottom of a mini and you could drop a big old honking fat, you know, zero point 0.5 anchor support on the bottom of this. It's going to leave a big old mark when you pull it out. But it is absolutely going to hold up this model. And the benefit is because it's on the bottom of the foot, nobody will ever see the marks, so you're good. My personal opinion is to do a slightly smaller, you know, I use a smaller tip on that. But then I also accompany it with 2 other medium-sized tips. We'll get into the settings and all that stuff here in a bit. But the reason I do this is if let's say we decided to go with a 0.5, well, we have a 0.5 millimeter tip worth of contact surface. Well, in this case, I went with a 0.4 and 2.8s. Well, I know my 0.28s are not going to leave a pockmark, even on the bottom of the foot. But what I've also done is I've mitigated the amount of damage to the model, but also increased my contact with the support by 1/3. Everything is give and take though. So the problem with this is I've used more resin to do so. So you just sort of have to figure out where your priorities lie, you know? With that in mind, let's discuss priorities of supports. Like, what are we doing? What's the goal, right? What's our highest priority? And let's work our way down from there. So this is Ty's pre-support priority list here. Number one, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, number one priority, quality of the model. It is super expensive, like it's super important. Let's do this. Sorry, I'm still learning my buttons here. Number one. So this is Ty's pre-support priority list. All right. Number one, quality of model. What I mean by this is that every time you place a support, you need to have the quality of the model, the detail of the model first in mind. This is your first question. If I place a support, am I damaging the model? If I place a support, am I going to lose detail? If I don't place a support, what am I going to be missing, right? Every single support, does this adhere to priority 1? This is key. Ty's pre-support priority number 2, ease of removal. I have broken so many models because the removal was quite difficult. I'll break an arm or an ankle or a sword or a shield off a model because there's a lot of contact with the model on the supports, or the supports cross in front of the model and make it very difficult to remove, or I'll damage a model or scratch it on a support pillar. So when I place supports, number one is the quality. If I have to sacrifice ease of removal to maintain quality, I'm going to do it. But most of the time I can still make an easily removable model while also maintaining the quality. So paramount, number one; secondary, number 2, make sure it's good quality, make sure it's easy to remove. Number 3, efficiency of materials. This is not last on my list of things I think of when placing supports, but it is something I do consider. So let me give you like an example of what I mean by efficiency of materials. So let's have a little look at, let's say, excuse me, this little bottom piece. We know there's a bunch of islands. We're not going to worry about the islands all that much, right? So let's say we're trying to make sure we pick up all these details. We're going to drop some supports. Let's say they're all light supports, and we're just going to place them down. So what I've done is I've created a bunch of full-sized pillars, and they do adhere to priority number 1. I am using these pillars to maintain the quality of the model. We're trying to keep that detail. They are easy to remove. You could easily pull these pillars right off the model with no issues. It's not going to trap any spots. It's not going to damage the model. But I don't necessarily adhere to priority 3, which is efficiency of materials, right? Could I alternatively have done something like this? Absolutely, I could have done that. And I don't have full pillars front to back, right? Or from bottom to top, so to speak. Because I'm using the tree in this way, I'm able to maintain priorities 1 and 2. I'm keeping the detail. It's easy to remove, and I've managed to not waste. It's a minor amount of resin, but I've managed to not waste a bunch of resin on pillars that were unnecessary. Sometimes you'll find that the pillars are necessary. We need to keep that model up, so we need some actual pillars to make bracings with. Like this might be totally necessary. But on that 10 other pillars I made, I was able to reduce the amount of resin usage by either making a tree or a fan or whichever method you want to use. But it shouldn't be first on the list. If it's better for me to have full pillars in order to maintain the quality of the model, do it. I don't care, right? I'll spend the extra money so that my model looks good. And it's like a sliver of a penny. But you do that over a couple hundred models, and all of a sudden it's $10, like $10 is a fourth of a liter of red. Like you can buy more models with that money. So that's sort of number 3 on Ty's priority list of pre-supports. 4th on that list, least important to me, might be important to somebody else. Efficiency would help if I could spell. Efficiency of time. Not my time to place the supports, but your time on your printer. All right. If we go ahead and look at the, I didn't want volume. I wanted print speed. If we go to print this with our current settings on the Frozen Sonic Mini at 25 microns at 2.1 seconds, we have about looks like about a 5.5 hour print time. Now this print time kind of kills your, you know what? I realize, oh no, we're good. Okay. I thought I had the wrong screen up. So this print time wears down your consumable parts in your printer, right? Your FEP is consumable. I don't think it takes damage, but it wears down over time. Your screen is consumable. Your LED lights are consumable. They will all give way eventually, right? Your screen is one of those expensive ones, especially if you have one of the 4K screens or like the Saturn or the EPEX or the Mono X, the E10 rather. These are not cheap parts. It's about 250 parts to replace the mono screen on the EPEX, I believe. So it lasts about 2,000 hours, but it adds up over time, especially if you're doing production or you plan on doing production. Like if you have 20 printers going, and we could have, possibly, this is not what you would want to do, but you could possibly have, an estimated printing time of 3.5 hours to get this model out. But otherwise, you would have 2 hours across 20 printers. I'm sorry, 5.5, you'd have a 2-hour difference. Across 20 printers, that's a 40-hour difference use on your hardware. And we want to make sure, like in production, like setups like that we may want to have a more efficient use of our hardware because we need that hardware to last as long as possible, but still produce more product. I think you usually, most of the time, sacrifice priority 1 in order to make priority 4. It's all give and take. Personally, I will never sacrifice priority 1. I'll never sacrifice sorry, got to get Bill in here. So it's sort of something that you're going to have to determine for yourself when you're choosing, where to place your supports, how to orient your model, all of those things. These are all things to consider. There are times, let's say, for example, we like to tilt our models back a little bit, where I could have the exact same amount of work. I could adhere to priority 1. I could adhere to priority 2. I could adhere to priority 3. I can save myself a little time, or it would be identical amount of time for me to place the supports just by tilting them a little more, right? Well, I just removed 30 minutes of print time, and all of the rest of the priorities have been maintained. So this is something to consider. I just think it's something to consider last, right? The problem is you can't really reorient your model after you've done your supports. You can, it doesn't work great, but it's something you're going to want to learn sooner than later on how to determine which orientation you're going to print your model. Now, I have a trick. It's not like the be all end all, but for a beginner, it can give you like a decent idea. And what you're going to do is you're going to go into Lychee, and I don't know if it's Lychee or Lychee, but you're going to go in here and you're going to do an island detector. And you're going to have a look at how many islands are on the model just as it sits in this orientation. So this will take a second, but we'll have a quick look. While we're looking, let's see if we can get Bill in here. Is there any chance anybody could post a link to the Twitch channel? If I don't know if anybody's here, but if anybody could post a link to the Twitch channel for Bill, that would be great. Awesome. Hey, Bill. What's up, man? Okay, it looks like we're finished. So in this particular case, we have 155 islands detected. So we could alternatively choose a completely different orientation. I'm not saying this is the right one, but it should just give us like an idea. And we can have a little look at the model and see if there's a difference in the amount of islands. This can possibly help us determine what might be less detrimental to the model. There's a few other things to consider, but these are things you'll learn as you go, or as we do more classes, you'll pick up and kind of figure that stuff out. Now, see, there's 139 islands detected in this method. So we definitely have a difference in the amount of supports we're probably going to need between these two different orientations. I would almost never choose this particular orientation. I try to keep the face clear of supports if I can. I try to keep the top of the model clear of supports if I can. And that's the part that everybody sees. Nobody sees the bottom, so we can hide a lot of supports in the bottom. So you'll make your own determination, but that's like an easy go-to. If I stand it straight up perfect, maybe I have 200 supports or 200 islands, but I tilt them back a little bit, I have 155. Well, there we go, right? I was able to maintain all the priorities in the priority list, but I was also able to save myself a little time and have less impact on the model. So just a couple of things to consider. So let's talk about, I mentioned earlier, my little cheat code for beginner supports. Let's say we haven't gotten into the theory of support placement yet, but we want to get printing. We're practicing, we're learning, but we need this model for tomorrow. Today's Thursday. We're playing tomorrow night. My party's on their way, or we're playing Saturday, and I need to get this model in the printer today, and I don't have time to learn all the ins and outs of supports. Well, here's a great start for you. You're going to need Lychee Pro. And I know there are some other options out there to do a similar one, but you can get away with this just with Lychee. You don't need Prusa Slicer. You won't need Cheat Box. You can do this all here. So my trick is to go over here to my auto supports and place my auto support density all the way down to the bottom. Then I'm going to place auto supports, but on the ground only. Right? What this means is that the auto supports won't place a support on top of the model. It will only place a support that reaches the ground instead. Okay, we want as few contacts with the model as we possibly can have with supports. What we're going to do is we're going to choose supports on ground only, and we're going to allow Lychee to determine maybe where those supports are best. I always do this with medium supports. I need to go back and talk about support settings. So save that for a minute here. So this isn't perfect. This will not print. There is not enough anchorage to keep this down. Furthermore, there's probably a number of islands that were missed because the auto support placement isn't great. It's okay. It gets us started. It's just not great. Okay. We could conversely use the higher settings and we can kind of slap on more supports, and there's going to be a bunch more. But I feel like by adding all of these extra supports, we're trying to alleviate the amount of contact while maintaining the quality of the model. And when we start to do stuff like this, it's going to be really hard to take this model off these supports. There's going to be places where we have like crossovers between all of these supports where his arm's going to be trapped and you're going to need cutters to get him out. I don't want to use cutters. I just want to pull my model off the build plate. So I always run this on low. It just gets me started. It saves me 50 supports worth of work when I'm doing it in this method. Now you can just generate automatic supports, and that's okay too. And if you're okay with sometimes it deciding to see, like here, it placed a support on the model, that's all right if you're okay with it. It's not what I prefer. Again, it's just personal opinion. In that case, you could do it. You probably would never notice. And then after that low automatic support placement, I will then go in with the island detector and kind of check out the islands real quick. I hope everybody's familiar with islands. And Gazzy, yeah. So Gazzy mentions that it's a pain to try to look through the forest when making adjustments. That is something I often struggle with, and let me show you here once I go through my island detector what I personally do to sort that out. So Chitu and Lychee both have a visibility option for your supports. If you go to your visibility, you can change your tips to be the only thing that are visible, and that your what I refer to as trees, where your tree trunks become invisible, but you still know where they're at. And now I can see right through the forest. I can kind of get everything in. Whereas otherwise, it might be hard to see some of these supports back here, where now I can see them perfectly. And I can start landing these supports where I want them. So that's one method. Yeah, the visibility setting is superb. The other option, and I'll do this more often than the visibility setting, is I want to get to this little spot right here. Well, these ones are in my way, so I just select them and hide them. And I can still see where everything is, and I can kind of see if I want to take and brace against another one, I can, because I didn't hide them all, and I can kind of see the snapping or whatever. So I more often choose to use the hide support option when I'm trying to see through the forest. But you can use either. Both work equally as well. But it is definitely a struggle sometimes when you have a lot going on. So it looks like after my auto supports, I have 108 islands. I'm going to set my island detector accuracy to real, and I'm just going to let it add medium supports to all those islands. Now, all said and done, I only have 5 islands left. Okay, well that's pretty respectable. I went from 155 islands down to 5, and I didn't have to place a single support by hand. Is this the optimal way for it to be supported? Heck no. Heck no, it's not. But if you're new and you're ready to get moving and you need to, use it. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go find these islands, like this little one here. Honestly, this is an unnecessary island, right? It's a problem with the mesh. You can pretty much just straight up ignore it. It'll print perfectly in spite of that island. Or if you're kind of like me, you need to get rid of it, you can kind of place a little support in there. It just tucks it away. You'll never see it again. Okay, here's an island that definitely needs supported. All right, so there's a spot on the back of his helmet that really needs to be held up. Well, there we go. One island placed by hand. Here's a couple of mesh issues, right? They're just, there's a hole in this mesh that we could probably fix. But these are little spots that Island Detector picked up because the decimation of the mesh didn't go perfectly well. And those are more advanced things, but I know that you could move forward without touching these two and you'll get the exact same print. So I'm going to skip them. Looks like there's one under his nose. This is a definite island and it definitely needs supported, but it's pretty far away from anywhere that we might want to support. I might try something like this. Possibly something I'd give a shot. Or if I was unhappy with the possibility of that working out, I might just put like a teeny little support. I don't like doing that. That's not a great one there. I might go out a little further so it's easier to remove. But you got a couple options. There we go. I had to place 3 handmade supports and all of our islands are gone. The only thing we have to consider is, will it print? So right now, it's a very low chance that it'll print because we don't have enough connection to the build plate. So we need to go to the very bottom of this model, the lowest islands. This is the lowest island on the model, and we need to put some big old fat anchor supports on these parts here. So this bad, this bad, this bad. We're going to go in here with a heavy. We're going to place a heavy here, a heavy here, a heavy here. And then as per my rules for placing, we want to accompany all the heavies with a couple mediums too. Now let's have a look a little ahead. I want to give it a little more support, so I'm going to plop a couple extra supports on that foot. We're going to come over to the other foot. Let's delete that one. We're going to change that one to heavy, that one to heavy. And then we're going to accompany those heavies with a couple mediums and then a couple little bitties above the foot. From here, I'd say your chances of this model printing pretty well straight out the gate is pretty high with the minimal amount of effort, So we've got good anchors, we've got good supports underneath some of the lower hanging places. We might find potentially troublesome spots and add a few supports, and we can get into the details of why they're troublesome. Like triceps are always hard. Yeah, Zio, you're totally right, but we're not getting quite that detailed yet. But Zio mentioned this support on the arm is way too thin, and he's absolutely right. It is. This is something we would go through and try to beef up a little bit, and maybe add an extra one just for extra support. So we can get into some of the heavier details of, like more specific details of support placement. But for the most part, you'll find that this will get you there or get you really close. So that's just a short little trick. Let's talk about the settings that I use. So here are some more of the opinion-based, information when it comes to this. So let's go to let's just start with a cube, and let's talk about supports on a cube. So we're going to kind of break it down to the beginning, and we'll get into some of these settings here. So first thing first, when we get in, we need to make sure that our cube isn't touching the build plate. All right. So I do this. I turn off all bracings, optimize supports, auto supports, and auto orientation. I don't want Lychee telling me where it's going. I just want it to go. So after that, I select medium, but it doesn't matter. And I click, I'm feeling lucky. Now what this does is this places the raft for me, and it lifts the model off the plate 5 millimeters. Now, if we're planning on supporting this cube, wondering why, I'm not figuring, there we go. If we're planning on supporting this cube, we want to first question whether or not this is an optimal way to support a cube. Anytime we're trying to support something, we want to offer the least amount of surface area to the build plate as we can whenever we can. If we were to try to support this and I were just to place one support in the corner, technically this cube is connected to the build plate, and technically that's all we need, right? Problem is there's more forces than just the one vertical force. And unfortunately, this will act as a fulcrum. It will twist the cube while it's lifting off the build plate. And the amount of surface area that will be lifting will rip this clean off the support. So we could place another one and another one and another one, but we know the center is going to sag or it's still not going to work. And we can place another one and another one and another one and another one and just kind of fill this in with a whole bunch of supports. But what will happen is we're going to start to see weird little sagging areas because most of you guys know those flat areas are affected by gravity. They're affected by pulling forces. This is not an optimal way to do supports. Now, could we conversely understand that a medium isn't enough, so let's do a heavy? Sure. That's closer. Can we do a heavy and a heavy and a heavy? It's still going to have the same result. It's just too much force, right? Forgot to talk about settings. Let me go back to settings. I want you guys, if you need them, to write them down. This is the settings that I use. If your printer is tuned properly, these settings should work for you and should give you very little to no damage to your model. For a light mini or for a light support, I use a 0.9 millimeter diameter for the trunk. So that's this diameter here for the trunk of the tree. You can kind of see that change in a bit. So we're going to use that 0.9. We're going to use a 0.22 tip. There's a time and place for this tip. This tip is never to be used to support anything with any weight, so to speak. It's only to maintain detail. And then I always use a tip length of 2, but tip length is subjective, right? Depending on what we need to get where we need to get, 2 is too short, 2 is too long. It just depends. But for the most part, I get away with a 2 millimeter tip length. When you have those settings in, you want to go to custom and override the preset. That preset's what's going to save those settings so you don't have to change them every single time you open Lychee. For mediums, I use a 1 millimeter diameter, a 0.28 tip diameter, and then also a 0.2 or a 2.0 tip length. I have found, and this is one of these things that is sort of a matter of debate, right? Some guys will choose a 3. Some guys will choose a 3.5. And there's a lot of different ideologies when it comes to this. I have some reasons why I use that size. Part of that is just trial and error. And then another one has to do with just a few extra little mathematics that I choose to adhere to when it comes to contact surface area, we'll say, right? So those are my medium supports. Our heavy supports, I use a 1.2 diameter pillar. I use a 0.4 diameter tip, and I stick with that 2.0 on the tip length. Okay, so I know that a 0.4 diameter will leave a crater in your print if your printer's tuned, right? It's just enough to leave a little mark. The mark is faint, but you should always be placing these somewhere on the model that you're not going to notice. Could we do a 0.5? Sure. I just think it's bad practice to put that big of a mark on a model unless you have no other choice. 0.4 is sort of the sweet spot for me. Now, I might get into some giant dragons and giant bases and things like that, where it's very clear that the support tip could damage it with no issue at all. And I'll jump up that size a little bit to give me some extra support. But on any standard model, a 0.4 is the biggest I'm going to go. Now, let's say, for example, you're one of the guys who says, no, 0.4 is too small. I need a 0.5. Well, this is what I would pose to you. A 0.5 is not as effective as a 0.4, which has smaller damage, and a 0.28 next to it. So I've now combined created 0.68 millimeters of surface area. And that's the reason I'm making this face is like, it's not exactly like that. There's a couple other elements involved, but you'd have to get really nitpicky for that to feel that way. So essentially, we've created 0.68 worth of surface area, but we've reduced the amount of damage to the model, right? We've created a greater resistance of force, and we've created less contact damage to our surface. Win-win, right? At the expense of using more material. Okay. So if material usage is a high priority to you, run that 5.0 if you want. But for me, I want the best quality on the model as I can accomplish. So I'm going to use that medium and that heavy. And oftentimes a heavy is accompanied by 2 mediums for me, just for extra oomph, right? So that's my go-to. So let's go back to talking about orientation, how to determine orientation, and then we'll kind of go from there. So let's reset rotation here. So we know from our previous supports that we don't like this amount of surface area, it just doesn't work. So what we want to do is alleviate the amount of surface area on an object by rotating it into a way that might provide us less. Now that we've done this, let's have a look at our surface area towards the bottom. Well, shoot, this is way less surface area to support than if we had it flat. And we don't want to, Gazzy, though. So like close enough, you know what I mean? Like, I think you could use those. You'd kind of have to pick your locations for those 4.5s, but I bet they're super heavy anchors. And I think the 2/100ths of a millimeter probably is subtly, if like no different at all. But play around with them. Like I have been very successful with a good printed, same with Uzio. I've been very successful with a good printed, tuned printer with these settings. And you just keep in mind, like you could have used a heavy, but you use 2 mediums instead. And sometimes that's going to pull. It's going to pull different. And sometimes it'll pull off the supports. You add a 3rd medium, it doesn't. And then those 3 mediums don't damage the model, even though a heavy might have. So I digress. So in this orientation, for those guys who are new, this is far less surface area than our previous orientation. So does that mean I can just place one model on it? Or I'm sorry, one support on there? Nope. This just definitely won't work, right? Obviously, we're not supporting it enough. Okay, well, maybe I'm being silly and I should place it in the middle. Will this work? Nope, it definitely will not. Yeah, Zio, give it a try on your test print and see how it goes, man. And just keep in mind that if you're going a little smaller on those mediums, you might just need an extra medium or 2 here and there to compensate. But with that smaller tip diameter, there's less damage to the model. But yeah, I'd love to hear your results on that for sure. This obviously won't work, right? We don't have enough support. We could probably get away with something like this. That's getting a little closer. We'll probably have sagging in the middle, so we'd want to throw some extra supports in. We're getting closer. This would print, right? I think you could probably put that on a printer and get pretty close to having a print. I think it would need some supports on the sides in some fashion, but you'd be pretty close. Is it optimal? No, it's definitely not optimal. But we've reduced surface area enough that we're starting to get the hang of it. So let's have another look at it. What else can we do? Well, let's rotate it on another axis. Now let's look at our starting surface area. Boom. That's nothing, right? We can throw a support on there, and that's it. Can we support the whole thing off that one tip? Maybe. It's not likely, right? And once we get to the center part where we got a really wide surface area, that's going to pull it right off the top of that support, but we're off to a good start. So here's where my tip, and probably, you guys who are experienced know this already or already do this, but this is what I refer to as chasing the edge. I think I made that term up. Maybe I heard it somewhere. I don't know. But the way I always approach this is if there's a hard edge or a definitive edge to the model. It doesn't have to be sharp like this, but some sort of line to follow, right? That you would want to maintain the shape of that line. I will always take and follow that edge all the way up. Now I could potentially stop here and just let the printer do the rest. But I worry about there being sagging or have problems. I just had a very large base I did where I actually did something akin to this. And it was dumb. I don't know why I did it. The base is the full size of my Mono X. And I decided to only put supports halfway up the model thinking that they would just handle the rest. And of course it didn't work, you know? So I just err on the side of caution and I chase all of these edges kind of all the way up. It doesn't have to be crazy. We're just gonna kind of follow them all the way up here. We're doing this sloppy, but we get the idea. I'll do this for cleanliness. Will this model print? Heck yes, this will print. This will print every time. And by the time we pull off the supports, we're probably not going to have that much damage because we're using mediums, right? The only one we might choose to have as a heavy is that bottom one, and it's going to damage the tip of that cube a little bit. So you could attempt to use a medium there, but the idea is that we were able to start with a flat orientation and find the best orientation for the model. So we want to remember to start with heavies, support the heavies with mediums, chase the edges, and maybe I can pull up another one where we could talk about chasing an edge. And make sure we got a really good orientation that's going to allow us enough support. Now I noticed that my cube just happens to be kind of tilting heavier on this one side. So I might decide to go in and just give it a little additional love on the way up, knowing that all of my medium supports are going to break off nice and clean. And I won't have to worry about the surface edge on that. So, okay, so let's have a quick break. I talk an awful lot. It's been an hour straight. I don't know if anybody has any questions or needed me to step in or clarification or anything like that. If I don't get any questions, then let's take a quick drink break for me and maybe a pee break, and we'll come back and let's start having a look at some Lychee slicer options that can help us create some more detailed supports. We'll start talking about fans and bracing and some of those things. We'll take a look at some physics involved if we can work it out. And then I actually have some prints I did today where I'm helping somebody learn how to do supports. They put together the supports and had a couple failures in the print. So I've got a little setup. We're going to have a look at some of those failures, and then we're going to have a look at the models, and we're going to see if we can nail down exactly what took place there and how do we fix it really easily. So basically we'll just learn how to kind of troubleshoot some problems we've had with supports that we've done so that we can easily just pinpoint it, fix it, and get it back in the printer as quickly as possible. So I'm going to take a short break, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll get back and get the stream started again. Hey. All right, we are back. Let's calm down this music here. Awesome. Cool. Okay, so okay. So let's have a look at an actual model, and we'll come up with some thoughts on how do we get started, and where to place supports, and we'll start looking at some of these features that Lychee Slicer has, and and just sort of get moving. You know, like let's get to the meat and potatoes of what exactly we're working on here. So I want to pull up a file here. I have a file from a guy who his name or his Patreon is called Velrock Art, and he is releasing this month a set of Leonin warriors, and we are going to have a look at one of those. He's released a few sneak peeks of them, and we're going to have a quick look at one of these. Now, these Leonin warriors are pretty difficult, actually. There's a lot of fine details to them, and there's a lot of elements and dynamic shapes and stuff. So it can be difficult to kind of approach a model like this and try to figure out which is the best way to orient or handle them. So there's a number of pain points I find pretty often. Anybody who does supports hates a few things that come up all the time. And one of them is teeth. Teeth are very difficult to place supports on. Usually because they're tucked in, they're very close to something else, and you don't want to add too much support to them, because they'll break off, or the supports are too heavy, or some such thing, right? So we kind of like look at some of those pain points first, and then make a determination on how we're going to address them, right? So if I decide that I'm going to tilt this model up and I'm going to put his teeth in the air, it's going to be really hard for me to get any sort of supports to the model in any sort of meaningful way that's convenient, right? And so what I've done is I've taken a pain point for myself and I've made it worse. And so this is one of those things where, in this case, I might leave the character just like this. I have access to the teeth. Some of the hair won't necessarily need any supports, and we've got access to a lot of the detail without having to wrap around the leg or over the arm or something like that. So if it were me, I would choose to do this support in this way. So we're gonna just kind of start supporting here, and we're gonna figure out some of the potential difficulties for having a model in this particular position. We're gonna need some really heavy anchors, because they're gonna be like, we can't have heavy anchors on the tips of these little, claws here. We can definitely have some heavy anchors there. We're gonna need some anchors on the tail, and definitely on the bottom of these loincloths. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start placing some supports real quick. We'll probably like work our way up his leg and then kind of stop there. We should have enough info from that. And I'm going to talk about some of the features that we're looking at using just to kind of get us familiar with Lychee. So some of this is going to be basic stuff. If you don't use Lychee, maybe this will help. Some of this might be stuff you just never heard of, or you didn't know the keystrokes, or whatever the case is. So we'll go ahead and do that. With Lychee, your light, medium, and heavy have keystrokes. By default, they're control 1, 2, and 3. 1 being light, 2 being medium, 3 being heavy. So we're going to switch over to heavy because we know we need to start with them. And in this case, I think 3 is going to be enough. But of course, as usual, we have to accompany our heavy supports with some mediums. I'm going to place a couple of mediums in the toes just to try to maintain the toes a little bit. So my assumption as of right now is that we have enough support on this foot to get away with the forces that are pulling up on it from the build plate. Once I get my anchors in, I mean, you could do this sort of the way you want, but I like to search my islands right away. Give me an idea of what stuff is hanging down there. Most of the time I can eyeball it and kind of get a really good idea, but it's really nice to have little red dots to look at and look for and hunt for. So let's do that first. Perfect. So we definitely know every single one of these red dots on this model need a support, period. So let's talk about what an island is. If you're unaware, you've probably heard it a few times. This little red dot is what we call an island. So when we look at the slicer and we start to break it down to, there we go. We start to break it down to what actually is taking place layer by layer. We notice that there's this little teeny speck here that isn't quite, it's just not quite connected to the rest of the model. It's kind of hanging out there in the middle of this ocean of gray, and this is what we call an island. These islands are not great because they're not connected to the build plate. And physics basically dictates that we can't just float this in the air. It just doesn't work that way. We need to make sure that in some manner of speaking, that this little island finds a connection to the build plate in some way. Now, if I go up another layer, well, it's found a connection to the build plate here, right, on this layer, but the layers previous to it didn't. This one here definitely doesn't have connection to the build plate. So we know that we definitely need a support here. So now when we go back down to the island, we know that island has some method of connection to that build plate. And that's the important part. We always have to have some method of connection. Whether it's this support or a thinner support or a heavier support or some more touching a support, one way or another, we need to make sure that island's touching that build plate. So let's work our way up. We can kind of scope out other islands if there are any to see. Oh, hey, there's one right there. There's two. So these are perfect examples, right? There's two islands here. It looks like it might be the bottom of his loincloth. It is. And the great thing to note is how long does it take, how many layers does it take before that islands catch up with the rest of the model, right? So if this is an island here, which it is, how many layers? 1, 2, 2 layers, 3 layers. So when I place a support on this, I have to ask myself, can this support carry this much resin until it reaches the rest of the model? When it reaches the rest of the model's going to carry it up, right? So we need to, all the support is just enough to carry the resin for those 2-3 layers up until a point where it intersects with the rest of the model. Now the rest of the model is going to act as a support, and that rest of that model is inevitably connected to the build plate by working down the leg and down through the supports. So in this case, do I need a heavy to support these 2 layers worth of resin? No, absolutely not. I could probably get away with a light here, or possibly, 2 baby lights here could work, where I don't need such a heavy contact because we're really not holding up that much resin with this. And it's getting picked up by the model really quickly. Conversely, let's have a look at this island here on the left. Look at how many layers we're talking of resin. And it picked up this island, but it's nowhere near the rest of the model. So this one is going to work its way all the way up. The supports we put on this are going to have to carry all of the weight of all of this resin all the way up to here. Once it reaches here and touches, all of a sudden the leg is carrying the weight And those islands, or those supports that we put on those islands, are going to be assisted by this contact with the model at this point. Once we hit this, we're pretty much smooth sailing. But if our supports are too light in these areas, and the build plate's trying to pull this off the FEP sheet, that pull is pretty strong. Those motors they got high torque, and that pull and suction is going to be pretty strong. It's going to pop that little loincloth right off the top of those two baby pillars, or the baby supports. It's just not going to work. So we need to always keep in mind exactly how much, I'm using quotes, how much weight are these supports carrying, right? Are they strong enough to maintain that level of tension, or that level of force, and still hold? Now, can I do this with 5 of these? Maybe. It's hard to say, right? I won't know until I print it. But what I'll do is, over time, I start to develop a sense for when it's failing, why it's failing, how many do we need. Something like this, I'm gonna go with mediums. We're using mediums probably 98% of the time. And what's my rule about chasing the edge, right? I want to chase the edge of the loincloth here. All right. So did I maintain the shape of the loincloth? I think so. So we adhered to priority 1. Is it easy to remove? Sure. I didn't cross over anything. It's not going to be overly difficult. So I maintained priority 2. Did I maintain priority 3? Is it efficient? Nah, it's not really efficient. I think we could probably get away with making some sort of branch here where we cross it over, we turn the supports into bracings, and then add extra supports without having to run all the way down. We could probably get away with that. It's marginal. It may not be worth going back and solving, because the amount of resin saved is just such a small amount. But if we get in those good habits now, it's worth it. So we could probably get away with that. We just have to keep in mind that once this starts pulling, it's going to be pulling on the pillars, on the trees, right? Even if it starts pulling on these branches that we've created, those branches go back down to the trees. It's going to start pulling on those trees again. So we need to be confident that these tree trunks are going to be strong enough to withstand all of the forces being pulled. If you determine you don't think so, drop a regular support. Make 2 new trees. That's totally okay. They're happy little trees, you guys. I happen to notice along the way there's an island here. So we're going to look at this little white indicator we have. This little white indicator will sort of tell us 2 things, right? It will tell us how much surface area is going to be pulling on that particular layer that we're looking at. It also helps us indicate parallel mesh to the build plate. So we know that if I get a big fat white area here, that this area is going to be mostly parallel with the build plate. Because of that parallel mesh, it's going to act very much like the cube we just talked about. When it's turned on its face, it's going to pull a lot. And so in order for us to make sure that this actually prints the way we want, we're definitely going to want to add a couple of supports here. Now, could we do this with 1 heavy or 2 heavies? Yeah. I'm using the wrong keys here. Sorry. I think we could, but then I worry about putting that pockmark on the model. I'm more comfortable adding 4 mediums than 2 heavies. Could I have maintained priority 1 and 2? Yes, I did. Could I have made it more efficient? Sure. I could have maybe turned these into trees. I probably won't, because that's not the highest priority for me. I'm going to leave it. So now we're kind of working our way up the leg. We're looking for more islands. We're starting to see more here. So we're going to need to start adding in supports. We're going to chase that edge. Right? That looks pretty okay. This might be overkill, but I know on these loincloths, they always seem to pull. I put 2 supports, 3 supports on it, still pulls off the supports, so I go a little overkill. But I know it's right on the edge. It's going to break clean, and I've got good enough settings and tuning that we should be okay. this right here on the tail, you might choose to put a heavy here. I would agree with that, but I would then follow up the heavy with a couple of mediums. We're going to kind of chase the tail a little ways just to kind of keep that arcing shape there nice and smooth. We're definitely going to need some supports on the bottom of the tuft on the tail. So we're just going to kind of see those. Now, I turned off the island detector because I want us to be able to recognize islands using this white, I don't know what they call it, white indicator tool or whatever the case is. I definitely want us to be able to see it and recognize it as we see it. This little tuft is going to have a little bit of surface area when it pulls. See how much of a little fat surface area we have there. So I might just give it an extra couple there just to ensure that we're good. These tips are kind of hanging over a little. We might give it a little love with the light just to make sure that we maintain that shape and detail because that's priority one. Let's have some more looks. There's all of these little bones here. All right. See these two we placed? That's probably a little much for just that little bone. I think that's way too much. So we're going to have a little look at these islands. Yeah, okay, we did two smalls on here. We could probably get away with that. Looks like we have another little island there. Those are some lights. Another one there. That's another light. I think we're probably pretty okay there. We might see a little bit in here. Throw a little light one there. And we'll just keep working our way up the leg from there. I think we're looking pretty good all the way in. We'll follow the tail all the way up. So typically I don't work with the slider like this. I've gotten used to just looking at the model, understanding, tips where I'm going to be looking for islands or where I'm going to be needing some extra support. Downward facing or downward pointing tips always require more than one support. Let's see if I can find one. These are perfect. So these tips that point down like this, it's not a lot of weight until it gets higher, and we can add more supports as we go up to just kind of give it some extra stability. But I've come to find that these downward facing tips can often just pull right. I think of it like a bullet. A bullet has a lot of focused tension or focused force when it gets shot, and it makes contact, and it's just really like a lot of, like, I don't know, narrowed, tipped, I don't know, force. And I feel like when we just have this one tip on the tip of another tip, we've narrowed down all of the pulling forces to that one little spot. And I feel like we can't rely on that one little spot to hold. So we want to make sure we accompany those little tips with at least one other support next to it. I can never trust them to be strong enough. I always want them to be a little stronger. So that's just kind of like a rule of thumb for me. I always double or triple support a downward pointed tip. And I always chase the edge, So, okay, so now that we're just placing regular supports, let's talk about some alternative types of supports. Like, what can we do in Lychee? You can do this in other programs, but what can we do in Lychee to improve or maybe get to some of these more difficult places? Let's say like somewhere up here in these feathers, like I can't really, like, Lychee doesn't recognize getting a support up there, right? But we want to get one in there. We know that it's going to be necessary. So what we might choose to do is to place a support in some maybe not necessary place, knowing that it's not going to create damage, but knowing that I might want to get in here to get a support inside a place that I couldn't otherwise. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create what they call a mini support. I refer to them as like trees, branches, and twigs. Those mini supports I call twigs. I'm going to hold Control and Alt, and I'm going to click where I want to place my support, and then I'm going to click where I want the bottom of the support to place. Now, in this case, the angle of this support is probably not going to print very well. It's not beefy enough to withstand the forces. So I'm going to give it a kind of a fatter tip, but at the base where it connects to the tree. So I'm going to click base tip up here on the right, and I'm going to go to my tip diameter. So this is the diameter of the base, and we're going to increase that. And in this case, I'm going to increase it to 0.6. Now my tip is the same size, but the base of it has gotten a little up. I think I can go heavier. So let's increase it to the full size of the pillar. Now it's far enough away from the mesh that it's not gonna actually fuse when it prints. So I feel like we were able to create this like unique full-sized support tip, and it was in a place where we otherwise weren't able to get without doing some sort of funky like mini support or something like that. That just so happens in this case we don't need it in that location, but it was just an example. But this is like an example of a customized support that we can place in a more difficult location. Conversely, we're going to talk about mini supports and when to use them. Here's a prime example of a place you might choose to use a mini support. See right here, this island? I might be able to reach that island with another one, but what about the one behind it? There's just no way I'm getting a support in there from the outside. Like, I'm just not really, like, that's just not going to work. It's going to be too steep, and in order for me to get it in there, I have to shallow up the angle, and then it's too flat. This is just not really feasible in any sort of meaningful way. Sometimes we just have to accept that we're going to have to put a support on both the model and on the island. So the way we do this in Lychee is either two ways. Lychee can sometimes detect it like you're seeing here, and you can just place it, and that's okay. You'll have to go in with tweezers every time you place one of these and remove it. We can choose where to place it by holding Control and Alt, clicking our island, and then choosing a landing place for that particular support. Let me fix the size of it here. So we can click it, and then let's say I want my support to come all the way out there. I don't, you know what I mean? But I get that choice by holding Control and Alt at the same time while I place the support. Now, when I'm doing these edits with the little balls and rods, you hit space. You have to have Lychee Pro in order to do these types of edits. But these edits will allow us to create some really dynamic support structures that just get us into locations that you can't get into without them. So in this case, here we go. We've made a support. We've now supported the island for this. You could probably use two. I don't think it's necessary to use two. But this creates a little pain point for whoever takes off the supports. Sometimes you just realize how small it is we're talking, right? A lot of times when we're looking at a model, we go, hey, look at this stitching, man. Look at this stitching. This is such good detail, right? But then we have a look at exactly how big that is. And then you have to imagine in your head in real life, how big is that stitch we're talking about? Well, if we know that the tip of our support here is 0.22 millimeters, because that's our light setting, and then we imagine 1 millimeter in our head, or we hold up our fingers and we look at how big 1 millimeter is. The tip of this support is a little over 1/5 of that. That's freaking small. I can't even really like make that with my fingers visibly. That's how small it is. So I realized that the tip of this support is very small mathematically. And so now I look at these details and I go, okay, how big is that detail? It's 1/5 of 1 millimeter, about. Well, those details are so minute that with the naked eye or even a paintbrush, you might find that it's quite difficult to actually get them to get them in there. Well, that's the printer's job to get those details in. But what I'm getting at is, what about this support? This support's about the same size, right? It's got a diameter of 0.22. And it's so small that you almost can't even get your fingers close enough together to indicate it. Well, with that in mind, there's a possibility that I could just tuck the support, have it still function in the way that I'd like it to function by covering up this island, knowing that it's so small that the human eye is going to have a really hard time picking it out anyway, and it's serving its purpose and no longer needs to be removed. It's too small. Why would you bother removing it? It's gone. Once the print happens, it disappears. If you forget it was there, you wouldn't even notice it if you wanted to try to find it again, right? So I've solved two problems in this way by giving support to this like piece of armor here, but also by tucking this mini support underneath and having in the back of my head exactly how small we're talking. We could print this and you'd never even know I did it. I fixed the armor, but you never even knew it, with no extra work on your end after you take the supports off. So by using this Control Alt option to make these mini supports, we've got a lot of really dynamic ability, or a lot of ability to create really dynamic supports that you otherwise couldn't make with a tree and a branch. But you need to have Lychee Pro in order to edit them like I just have. So again, I recommend Lychee Pro. Get it. It's worth it. Do it. Okay. So let's go back to talking about, let's say, maybe some teeth. And I'm going to give a scenario that might be, that doesn't exist in this case, but we're going to create a scenario that's difficult. So I'm going to place this support here, and it's a light support. Actually, one thing I wanted to mention, in case you guys are wondering, why do I have different support diameters when one support diameter would most likely work, right? The reason I do that is because I can visually tell the difference between a light, a medium, and a heavy without having to actually click them. You can see the difference in support diameter between the three. So this is just a little trick to help me identify supports without losing any function of those supports. If I need to, I can always go in and change the light to a 1. But that's the reason I do that. If you don't do that, I find it to be very helpful. But let's say, as an example, we need to get in here and we're having a hard time reaching, right? We shouldn't be doing this here. We should probably be tucking it somewhere else. But let's say we're having a hard time reaching. We want to get in, but we can't quite get the support in where we want it. This is ridiculous. This isn't a real scenario, but you'll find this scenario occasionally where you've just got to get really far in. You've got a really steep angle that's not going to hold well. And we're going to need to work our way around some sort of arm or limb or weapon of some sort. We're going to have a hard time getting this steep of an angle to print at a 0.90. Right? It's just too thin of a tree trunk for it to maintain its integrity. We have to keep in mind that at this point, while this support's being pulled on, it's being pulled directly straight up. It's gonna flex, right? It's just resin. It's not made of steel. It's gonna give a little bit when that build plate pulls up on it and tries to pull it off the FEP. It can deform there. So there's some little tricks we can do to improve that. One is let's beef up such a long support. Let's make it a 1.3. Give it some meat. It'd be harder to flex. There's more material there. Another option you can do is to create a second support. You may not need a second support, But by creating a second support close by, you can use that second support to create bracings. We're going to have a lot more strength and stability by having two supports hold each other up as that build plate happens. So that's another option. A third option, maybe having a second support in there is just not feasible. A third option, you hold down the Alt button and you can see where I'm snapping to this support here. Well, we can use this snapping function to create a smaller brace. Right? We didn't have to start that steep angle. We might have been able to work this angle just over the top of whatever it is we're trying to get around. And creating this brace is going to create stability in this joint that we've created. And it might just be the difference, you know? It might just get us there. The other option is if we can't find a location to comfortably place a second pillar, we can use this Alt button and double click and use that one pillar to create a second pillar. And we can use that second pillar to brace against. So the whole base of this one super long, support is held up by two nice fat supports. And we are way more likely, and we may even choose from here to go in and add in that extra brace. Now we're starting to talk about a real solid support, something that's gonna make it all the way across. Okay. So these are some ways we can utilize the tools that Lychee gives us to create more dynamic bracing structures. You might also choose to create some like scaffolding. You might choose to create some scaffolding. And you can do that just by adding another support somewhere else and scaffolding over and creating a structure that's architecturally stronger. All of these supports aren't necessarily necessary, but by adding them in, we're going to use this support to help this support be stronger. We're going to use this support to help this support be stronger, and they're going to brace on each other. And now we've created a structure where we might, let's say like these teeth up here, they're really hard to get to. Well, what if we create a cross brace and a mini support with a fatter base? Well, now I've created a nice stable platform structure in order to get in and drop those supports on those teeth in a nice clean way that doesn't disrupt anything. So we can use this little function here to create ourselves a nice tower or a nice bracing or a nice scaffolding that we can then use to get ourselves into a place we otherwise wouldn't be able to. Also, let's say we just weren't able to get this tip all the way there. We couldn't figure out, for whatever reason, we just couldn't figure out how to get that tip in there, the place we needed it, and still have it work. Well, we can convert this tip into part of the trunk. And we could just float it in the air. And from here, we might then choose to add to the teeth. This angle's too steep, it won't work. But for the sake of discussion, we'll say we were able to just turn that tip into a tree trunk and then use that floating trunk to create our branches off that tree. Now, the way we do that, if you just try and you snap it, let's say it's heavy, and we snap it to the model, it will always try to stick to the model. If I try to snap it off, it'll always want to stick somewhere. And the way we can force this to not do that is by grabbing the ball on the end of the tip, holding the control button, and now it will land in space wherever we want. So we can force any part of this support into any location in space that we want. And we can use this any creative way you can imagine. Gazzy just said, useful to go around weird bends. Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I can use that to create a weird bend, use that tip, and we're at a 0.2. 1 point, yeah, we're going to do 1.2, 1.25 is fine, 1.25. And then we're going to branch off that to another location. And now we've been able to get like a weird, again, this is one of those examples that won't work, you know, but now we've gotten right up by the ear. Maybe we needed a support right here on the ear, and we just couldn't find another way to get there. Well, we are able to create this advanced structure by using Control and Alt to locate our support tips in space, and then attach, using Alt, attach bracings to those floating elements, so we could get that, all of that for just that one support. But maybe that's the difference between, you know, the ear printing and the ear not printing. And these are all what ifs, not in this case. Like we could easily just drop a support there. But the idea is, what if that were the case? So these are some elements of Lychee that a lot of people don't know about, especially if you're new, is like what's possible. The last thing we're going to talk about before we start looking at actual prints, like failed prints, is how do we make fans? Fans are a great way to follow a blade. We always want to chase the edge. Let me find something with a sword on it. Here we go. So some of these guys that are out here doing pre-support work, they love fans. Fans are amazing. They're low impact on the model. They add a great amount of support. You're going to see them all over the place. They love their fans. I am a fan of fans. So let's talk about how do we actually make a fan in Lychee. We're going to place our medium support on the edge of this blade. Now we want to maintain this shape. No sag. We want it to be nice and sharp. Actually, let me give an even weirder angle here. Just for the sake of argument here. Okay. So we want to maintain this blade, but we know it needs to be supported all the way out, or it's just not going to work. So we're going to create a couple of tree trunks, and then we can create a couple of different fans. And there's two different ways you can do fans. You can use branches and you can use twigs. Okay. The way we use a branch is by holding Alt, clicking where we want the support, and then clicking where we want the support to connect to. So we've created a branch to this tree, and we can do another branch that attaches to the exact same location on the tree by holding Alt and Shift. Now, no matter what I do, you'll see that base doesn't relocate. So if I wanted to place a couple more easily, all of those branch off the exact same spot on the tree, and you use Alt and Shift in order to do that. But let's say some of these guys out here are like, but fans, but like that's too much. You don't need that much. They're absolutely right. You don't need these big supports in this case. Let's do a mini support instead, a twig. We're going to delete this one and use this one instead. So let's say we want to chase this edge up, and we want to create a fan. Well, we're going to place this first support, right? And we're going to place it down here. Now, this is too long. We can't leave it this way. There's not enough stability in this support. It will really easily be overcome by the lifting of the build plate. So we're going to increase the tip of the base diameter, and we're going to match the width of the tree trunk. Now that we have this selected, we can go back to using Alt and Shift. And we can just rapid fire place our fan right here, all up this edge. So Lychee is a little bit finicky about how you edit these fans, okay? if I decide that I put medium fans all the way down this edge, it was unnecessary, right? I didn't need medium fans, or medium tips. I needed light tips. Well, if I go back and edit this and change it to light, it's going to dump the base diameter and erase it. So what we'll need to do is we're going to need to go back in and recreate that base diameter. So we shrunk the tips a bit and then recreated that base diameter. These fans are unbelievably useful. Like, just in so many ways, in so many locations, this is fantastic. So this is going to create a lot of vertical stability. As the build plate pulls vertically, it's going to hold up a huge portion of this sword. And the fantastic part about fans is that when you go to break them off, you're not going to pull the fan like this. You're going to pull the fan off by breaking it off the sideways. And every single one of those tips is just going to just cleanly snap off sideways. So you created a perfect amount of extra force vertically where you needed it. But you could just snap it off sideways. It'll come off perfectly clean. I often will rub my fingernail right down the edge of the sword. It takes off all the little tips. Looks perfect when I'm done. Go to the tip tab, which only edit the top of the tip. Go to the tip. Hey, that's a tip that I didn't know. So let's go ahead and give that a try. We're gonna create our base tip, or our twig, and we're gonna turn it medium. And we notice that we lost our base there. So what Gazzy mentioned is that instead of doing it that way, we could still create our tip. But let's say we don't want that medium. We want to go to light. We can go to this tip tab and change the tip tab instead. What did I do wrong? Hopefully I got that right. Let me try that one more time. We're going to go to the tip tab. We're going to change the tip diameter to 0.22. There we go. So it shrunk the tip without shrinking the base. That's a fantastic tip. I'm glad you told me that. I will use that more often. So just a little, put that in your pocket for later. So anyway, those are the basics. That's all of the strongest functions of Lychee, and you can be creative about how you use them and where you use them. Keep in mind that big anchors go on the bottom, that you need to be looking for islands, and you can utilize that first tip about using auto supports on low and then using the island detector to fill in the gaps, and then going in yourself and then picking some places that you think might need a little extra support, and then use these supports in order to help out the automated support placement. So real quick, while we got a couple minutes left, let me switch over to a different camera here I've got set up for you guys. And we're going to have a quick look at a couple of failures in a print or two prints that just got missed when we were placing supports in them. Keep in mind the resin I use for test prints is like lesser quality, so it's kind of powdery. It rubs a little bit. I try to use up old resin when I do test prints. But let's have a quick look at the miniatures. And I have to move my microphone, so hopefully this works. Let's have a quick look at one of these models. So really up close, you could definitely see. You can see like two little marks underneath the arrow there. But what we're going to be looking at on some of these models is like where did major failures take place? This is a better model to work on. So ignore all the little powdery stuff. This is just not the best resin. But we can definitely see that right here, this little portion, the back and the front, flattened out on the loincloth. And that doesn't look great. We can see here, like a really bad error, like we had delamination in these locations. They just don't. This just absolutely isn't acceptable. I'm trying to do this. So we need to recognize what this means when we see this. This means that there wasn't enough support in that location. It means that this flat part wasn't enough support in that location. And so we can kind of see that happen in various models occasionally. Like here's a great example. Like here's one of his axes. Let's get it in focus here. And then here's his other axe. Like what happened to his axe? And so what happened was we just didn't get enough supports here, and we didn't get what we needed in order for the printer to pull this off the build plate, and so it just ripped the axe right off the supports and flattened out. So what we're gonna do is let's have a quick look at. I have one of these files backed up. Give me a second here. Let's go back to Lychee. Let's see if we can find our backup file. I think I kept the folder. I sure hope so. Oh no, I don't remember. Oh, class files. Here we go. Let's have a quick look. I think Orc 5 is the one we're looking at right now. It is. All right, so let's have a look at let's have a quick look at our support. What do we think happened on this arm? Well, if we really look at that arm and where it failed, get the microphone here. It didn't really fail on the bicep, right? It looks like it failed. Looks like it failed right underneath the bracer. What it looks like is that these two supports here just weren't enough to withstand the forces. And so what we need to do now is recognize that problem. Also, this support doesn't work. That's an island. That support in and of itself is an island. So we've recognized a couple of issues with this. Let's go in and kind of make a couple of corrections. We know we need more support under here. We know it failed. So I'm going to go ahead and place a medium, and I'm going to use a little tree branch. And I'll place another one here and use a little tree branch. And then under here, we know that we could use a little support. There we go. Maybe one under here that's a little beefier. Maybe a little friend to go with them. Boom. So what we did is we went and looked at the file that we printed, noticed that there was a flat spot, and we come right back to the Lychee file, and we can easily point it out. Like, oh yeah, there was only one real support holding up that whole bit, and that's just not enough. So let's add 3 or 4. Now we'll go back, print the file. This will print perfect. What about some of these other problems? What about the loincloth? Let's get rid of some of these. Right? Oh, bracings. My goodness. Let's get rid of those bracings. All right, let's look at this loincloth. Why did this loincloth fail? Well, as stated earlier, any downward pointed tip requires more than one support. That's just how it works, guys. Like every single one requires at least 2 or 3 in order for that tip to be maintained. The same thing happened in the back here. Right? This little tip back here, downward facing, try to get rid of some of these for you guys to see. This downward facing tip only had one support on it. It needed 3. So there we go. Now we know that those areas have been fixed. We were able to locate the problem, identify what it takes to fix them, and then slap some new ones in. It took seconds. We now know that we could probably run this print, and none of those things that we just had fail will fail again. So it's as easy as that. Like all failures, and this is cliche, guys. I know it. I totally know it's cliche, but all failures are just lessons, especially when it comes to 3D printing, right? If you print and you have a flat spot in a place where you placed a support, you just learned something. What you learned is that that one support wasn't enough. And that's easy to fix. It sucks because you have to print again. You might put more time on the printer. You might have a deadline, or you wanna have it ready by Saturday. But it's the name of the game. Don't let it frustrate you. That's just sort of that's it. Fix it. Learn from it. Next time you have a downward facing tip, here's a prime example. Look at these. Three points. Every single one of these axe tips, 3 points. That's because I learned my lesson. Like that one downward facing tip needed more than one support. So we had to learn our lesson the hard way on the last file. And now we know on this file that it's necessary, right? So um so these are some areas. I think on this model we had a flat spot under the arm, and it looks like just those two supports were quite enough. We'll add a third. Down here, see this tip on this armor? We didn't chase the edge like we should have. Chase the edge. So the other aspect was, I think, this axe head or this axe blade didn't come out as clean as we wanted. So yeah, I think it's really important. Same down here. Not enough on that tip, maybe. We'll put another one. So it's important that once we print, we see failures, and it's I think it's super important that we're able to identify and recognize those failures, and also understand how simple they can be to fix. Like there are many times, and it doesn't matter how often you do this, right? 150 islands. I'm bound to miss one, you know? I won't miss one because of the detector, but I'm bound to miss a thing. There's so many elements to every one of these models that you're not likely to just nail it every time right out the gate. You're going to do a test print. The test print's going to have a flat spot or a failure. You're going to recognize the failure, drop in another support. Keep in mind the hierarchy. Keep in mind suction forces, which is what most things are. Have a look at your settings and tune. All of those things affect whether or not you get a successful print. And then make your corrections and throw it back in. Most of these printers are printing in 4 hours, 5 hours for a mini. Not huge monsters, but minis. So you can throw it in there, come back after work, and you got a print and it's waiting. Come back when you wake up. We get a nice new mini that's all fixed and everything, and the world is good. So that's it, you guys. I don't know if you guys have any questions. This kind of be the last spot I have here to answer any questions if anybody has any. I'd like to continue doing classes each week. This is very new to me, so I'm still learning how to format a class, how to not get sidetracked. I know I go on tangents and I need to work my way back. So I'll continue to improve in how I go about this. And I'm going to try to have a few more examples of print failures and print successes, and we'll kind of go from there. But it's kind of a new thing. I don't know if a whole lot of people teaching classes in this format, so I don't really have like a format to go off of. So I hope you guys learned something. Hey, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. I tried really hard. I wanted to make sure I gave a better presentation this week. I think I touched on a lot of the same points as last time. Just anybody who's new, I want to make sure they're getting the basics. And if you forgot last time, I didn't have a VOD available for you. I have been recording this one. I sure hope I've been recording this one. So I'm going to toss it up on YouTube. You guys can click. I think there's some links below that show our YouTube channel. I'm still learning Twitch too. So I definitely put an icon somewhere, and I think it's either right below video right now or it's on the About page. You can also see the absolutely crazy thing I did a year ago. I 3D printed the Wave Echo Cave. And if you guys are not familiar, that at scale is 8 foot by 6 foot 3D printed dungeon. It took me 3 folding tables to fit it in our D&D room. So you can see the only video on our channel which has to do with that. And then we're hoping to get more content up, and we have a whole slew of like things that we do. We have some artists on staff. You can see our, our logo, the little guy up in, I don't know which corner, one of these corners. You'll see him when I log out. His name is Puck. He's our little angry dragonborn friend. That was done by Morgan. She's one of our artists on staff. We're starting to work our way into map making and illustration and stuff like that. So we're trying to grow beyond just 3D printing, but we know that there's a lot of people out there who they just don't know where to start, and it's overwhelming, and it's really hard. So if you come across somebody who's just can't figure it out, or you just see that, hey, they're having support problems, they tried to support their model, it didn't work, and they just are asking questions, like, send them this way. Share the stream. I'm trying to do this free. I think it just benefits everybody. Um, so by all means, send them that way. We're gonna try to get some maybe art streams and some painting streams going. So one of our artists, Laura, she's a miniature painter. She's constantly working to get better, and she's working on some new stuff lately. I think we just spent like $300 on new paints, so she's getting accustomed to the new paints, and then maybe we can get Morgan on stream doing like some character art, and and yeah, so we're gonna try to expand it. It'll be more than just classes here. Maybe we can make some other things that are entertaining or delightful for you. And I would just want to thank you guys for coming. I know it's 2 hours is probably a long class to hear me drone on about some of this stuff. So if you stuck with me the whole time, thank you. If you dropped in at any point and just to say hi, thank you. I'm super glad you guys came. Um, I'm just, hopefully I helped. And if I didn't help you this time, maybe you know what I'm sharing and you can send some people who could really use the help learning. So I'm going to sign off now. Check out all of our links, and I hope you guys follow me and kind of see some of the other stuff we got going on. So love you guys. Thanks for watching.